My father posted in the family group chat, Sunday, all 13 of us will be staying at your beach house for the next 2 weeks. Make sure everything is ready. My wife replied that our son was sick and needed rest. My father's answer came less than a minute later. Nothing is changing. I stared at those 3 words, while listening to my son's coughing echo through the hallway. My wife sat beside his bed, with a thermometer in one hand and a cold cloth in the other. Her eyes were tired. She already knew what my parents were like. For years, my family's plans had arrived as commands disguised as invitations. My beach house. Their rules. Their schedule. Their expectations. I typed a single word into the group chat. Fine. No argument. No pleading, no anger. By Friday night, my mother was already sending grocery lists. By Sunday morning, 13 relatives were driving toward my house, completely certain they had won. They had no idea that fine had never meant yes. The beach house had never really been mine in my parents' eyes. Yes, my name was on the deed. I had worked 12 years to afford it, taking extra contracts, missing holidays, and saying yes to projects nobody else wanted. But to my family, it was simply the new gathering place they were entitled to use whenever they pleased. The old family cabin had been sold years earlier after my father's business struggles. When I bought the beach house, my mother proudly told relatives that the family finally has a vacation home again. Not that I had bought a house. That we had one, there was a difference. My younger sister held birthday parties there without asking. My cousins invited friends I had never met. My mother once gave my spare room to a neighbor's son because he needed a weekend by the ocean. Every time I objected, I heard the same sentence. Families share? Funny how sharing only seemed to move in one direction. My wife Emma noticed it long before I did. She saw how my father's requests sounded more like instructions, how my mother volunteered our time, our money, and our home before speaking to us first. She never pushed me to confront them. She simply asked questions I didn't want to answer. If your parents treated a hotel this way, would they ever be invited back? The truth was uncomfortable. I had spent most of my life being the reliable son, the fixer, the one who stayed quiet to keep peace at birthdays, weddings, and Christmas dinners. My older brother had inherited my father's confidence. My sister inherited my mother's stubbornness. I inherited everyone's expectations. Then our son got sick, and for the first time, my family's convenience collided with my responsibility as a husband and father. They expected me to choose them. For once, I didn't intend to make the usual choice. The first car rolled into the driveway at 9:07 Sunday morning. The second arrived 4 minutes later. By 9:30, 13 people stood on my front porch with suitcases, coolers, beach chairs, and the comfortable confidence of people arriving somewhere they believed already belonged to them. My father stepped forward first. Good, you're up early, he said, handing me the keys to his SUV. There are a few more bags in the back. Not hello, not how's your son. Just instructions. My mother walked past me before I could answer. I hope you stocked enough breakfast food this time, she said, glancing toward the kitchen. Last summer we ran out of orange juice by the second day. The words were casual. The tone wasn't. My wife stood quietly near the staircase leading upstairs to our son's room. Nobody asked where she had been. Nobody noticed the exhaustion under her eyes. My aunt finally looked toward her and smiled politely. Children always get sick before vacations, don't they? My wife forced a smile. He has a fever. My aunt nodded as if discussing the weather. He'll be fine by tomorrow. Conversation moved on immediately. My cousin was already asking about the Wi-Fi password. My sister wanted to know which bedrooms she could choose from. My brother opened the refrigerator and frowned. Only almond milk? I watched my wife lower her eyes toward the floor for a moment. Just a moment. Long enough for me to notice. Long enough for me to remember. My father wandered onto the deck overlooking the water. Perfect weather, he said. Good thing we didn't delay the trip. He said it loudly enough for my wife to hear. The room fell quiet for half a second. Not because anyone disagreed, because everyone understood exactly what he meant. Then my mother clapped her hands once. All right, she announced cheerfully. Who wants to see their rooms? I looked around at 13 smiling faces. Guests usually wait to be invited inside. My family had skipped that part years ago. The moment came just after noon. My wife was sitting beside our son on the upstairs landing, trying to convince him to drink water. His cheeks were flushed with fever, and every few minutes another cough shook his small frame. Downstairs, laughter drifted through the house. Someone had connected a speaker to the living room television. The dishwasher was running. Cabinets opened and closed. The beach house sounded less like a home and more like a crowded hotel lobby. Then my mother appeared at the top of the stairs. "We're ordering seafood for lunch," she said casually. "Can you bring your son downstairs for a little while? Everyone wants to see him." My wife looked up. "He needs to rest." My mother smiled the same smile. She used whenever she planned to ignore an answer she didn't like. "Oh, he'll survive 20 minutes with his family." My son pulled the blanket closer around himself. "I don't feel good, Mom." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then my mother sighed. "Children recover faster when people stop treating them like they're made of glass." She turned and walked downstairs before either of us replied. I stood in the hallway staring at the empty staircase. Not angry, not surprised. Just finished, because suddenly I understood something I should have realized years earlier. This wasn't about a vacation. It wasn't even about the beach house. It was about ownership. My parents believed access to my home meant authority over it. They believed being older made their decisions final. They believed my wife's concerns were suggestions, and my son's illness was an inconvenience. And they believed I would do what I had always done. Stay quiet, adjust, make room, keep the peace. Downstairs, I heard my father call out from the deck. "Can someone grab more chairs from the garage?" Everyone assumed I would be the one to move, the one to bend, the one to sacrifice comfort for harmony. Standing outside my son's bedroom, I finally made a decision that should have happened years earlier. I took out my phone, opened the family group chat, and started typing. The message I sent to the family group chat contained exactly 23 words. Since everyone decided our son's health wasn't important enough to delay this trip, we've made other arrangements for the house. No accusations, no arguments, no explanations. I put my phone back in my pocket and walked downstairs. Years earlier, when I bought the beach house, my lawyer had insisted on something I had almost ignored at the time. Family disagreements become legal disagreements faster than people expect. At his suggestion, every stay longer than 3 nights required written permission from the owners for insurance purposes. It wasn't complicated. Just a condition attached to the vacation rental coverage attached to the property. My wife and I were the only authorized occupants listed for that month. Nobody else. At the time, it had felt unnecessary. That afternoon, it felt surprisingly useful. I called the property management company that handled maintenance while we traveled. They already knew the policy. Within 20 minutes, they had arranged temporary lock code changes for every exterior door and disabled the guest access profiles connected to the smart entry system. Everything was professional, routine, documented. My father was standing on the deck when I walked outside. "Where's the garage key?" he asked. "There isn't one anymore," I replied. He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means the house isn't available for guests." For the first time all day, silence settled between us. Not anger. Confusion. The kind that appears when certainty suddenly disappears. Behind him, my brother was carrying luggage toward the hallway. My sister was already discussing bedroom arrangements with my cousins. Plans had been made. Expectations had been built. Assumptions had become facts inside their heads. I looked back toward the upstairs window where my son's curtains were still closed against the afternoon sunlight. For years, I had confused kindness with surrender. This time, I was choosing something else. Boundaries. Quietly enforced boundaries. And unlike arguments, boundaries didn't require permission from the people affected by them. The first person to understand what was happening was my brother. He walked back into the living room holding his phone. "The front door code isn't working anymore." Conversations stopped one by one. My father looked at me from the deck. "What did you do?" I set my coffee mug down on the kitchen counter before answering. "I secured my house." My mother laughed softly, waiting for the punchline that never came. "Very funny. I'm not joking." The room became strangely still. Outside, waves rolled against the shoreline with steady, indifferent rhythm. Inside, 13 people waited for someone else to speak first. My father stepped forward. "We drove 3 hours to get here." "I know." "Your cousins took time off work." "I know." My mother crossed her arms. "You said fine." "I did." She stared at me. "Then what is this?" I looked toward the staircase leading upstairs. This is me believing my son's health matters more than a vacation. For the first time that day, nobody had an immediate response. My wife stood quietly near the stairs, saying nothing. She didn't need to. My father shook his head slowly. "You're overreacting." "Maybe," I said, "but it's my decision to make." The sentence landed harder than I expected. Not because it was loud, because it challenged a rule that had existed in our family for decades. My decisions had always required approval. Apparently, ownership changed that equation. My sister looked around the room. "So where exactly are 13 people supposed to go now?" I handed my father a printed list. Nearby hotels, available rentals, phone numbers, addresses. Everything organized before they had even arrived. His eyes moved down the page. "You planned this?" "Yes." The silence that followed felt different from the others. Not angry, not shocked, just unavoidable. One by one, suitcases were lifted again. Car doors opened. Engines started. No shouting. No dramatic exits. Just 13 people leaving the same way they had arrived. Certain they were coming for a holiday. Realizing they had just attended the end of an arrangement that had lasted far too long. The family group chat stayed silent for almost 3 hours. For a group that normally produced hundreds of messages during a vacation weekend, the quiet felt unnatural. Then my sister finally broke it. "You embarrassed everyone." A few minutes later, my aunt added, "This could have been handled differently. Not your son should get better soon. Not how is your wife holding up. Just disappointment that their plans had been interrupted. Some things reveal themselves most clearly when people are inconvenienced." My father didn't message at all that day. Neither did my mother. That worried me more than anger would have. Silence in my family had always meant recalculation. By Monday afternoon, relatives had divided into predictable groups. Some believed I had overreacted. Some privately admitted they would have done the same thing. Most avoided choosing sides altogether. Family peace often survives by asking the reasonable person to stay reasonable a little longer. This time, that person had declined the role. 2 days later, my father finally called. His voice carried none of its usual certainty. "You could have just told us no." I almost laughed. We both knew that wasn't true. For years, no had been treated as negotiation, as disrespect, as betrayal. This was the first time my answer had been protected by something stronger than my willingness to defend it. A locked door. Meanwhile, our son slowly improved. The fever broke on Wednesday morning. My wife slept through the night for the first time in days. The house was quiet except for the sound of waves outside his window. Exactly what we had asked for in the beginning. Looking back, the beach house was never really the issue. The issue was permission. Who gets to decide what happens inside your life, your home, and your family? People care about stories like this because almost everyone recognizes some version of it. The meeting you're expected to attend. The favor you're expected to give. The boundary you're expected not to have. Sometimes the loudest thing a person can say is a calm and enforceable no. A week later, my father finally sent a message. Not an apology. Not an argument. Just 4 words. "How is your son?" I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "He's doing much better. Thank you for asking." It was a small thing, 4 ordinary words arriving several days late. But in families like ours, small things often carry the most meaning. The following month, my mother asked if they could visit for a weekend in August. Asked. Not announced. Not assumed. Asked. I almost didn't recognize the difference. I said yes. Not because I had forgotten what happened, but because boundaries aren't punishments. They're instructions. They teach people how to remain in your life. Over time, some relatives adjusted quickly. Others still acted surprised whenever I said no to something unreasonable. A few probably never forgave me. I learned to live with that, for years. I believe protecting relationships meant accepting discomfort in silence. What I eventually discovered was the opposite. Relationships survive honesty far better than resentment. The beach house feels different now. Not because the walls changed. Because I did. When I stand on the deck in the evenings, listening to the waves roll toward the shore, I no longer feel responsible for carrying everyone's expectations. Just my own responsibilities. My wife notices it too. The hesitation is gone. The automatic apology that used to appear, whenever I disappointed, someone has quietly disappeared. Our son remembers none of the arguments, none of the tension. He remembers sleeping through the afternoon while the Ocean moved outside his window, and his parents sat nearby. If I had to choose between protecting family traditions and protecting that memory, I would make the same decision every single time. People often imagine revenge as noise, raised voices, slamming doors, public victories. But sometimes the most powerful revenge is much quieter than that. Sometimes it sounds exactly like a lock clicking into place. And for the first time in my life, when I locked my own door, it finally felt like I was opening one too.